Welcome into the horse race. I'm Daniel Vaughn. I'm an attorney and the senior columnist at the Conservative Institute. And today we've got a jam packed show for you, going through all of the latest news that is going to impact the 2024 election and all the candidates involved in there. So, on the docket for today, the most viral story that's going around this week has to deal with Joe Biden freezing on a stage in Hollywood during the middle of a fundraiser. That happened uh, last night around there, and it went viral immediately after that. After a reporter for the Hollywood Journal proceeded to put that out to the world, was just sitting there filming with his camera, and that got everywhere. And now the White House is playing catch up on all fronts and is playing full on defense because this video has just flat out gone viral and everywhere. Second up, we've got Joe Biden announcing a new amnesty program for illegal immigrants who are married to American citizens. He's rolling this out on Tuesday, June 18th. So I'm going to go into how both sides are reacting to this and what they're going to do, both pro and against, to deal with that as we head into November. The third thing is that there's a new survey out. Talk a lot about polling here, but this is a survey from Credit Karma, and it shows how Americans are really feeling the pinch right now when it comes to the grocery store in particular. So inflation is still a major issue. Credit Karma really asked some tough questions of Americans of how they were feeling. It's kind of an interesting thing to go through when you're factoring in what's going to happen in November, when you're asking people, hey, how are you feeling when you go to the grocery store? And how are you handling these higher prices? Do you think they're higher prices? And they got some really interesting results that they're going to dig into. And then finally, there was a devastating poll out of Iowa that has both the White House on red alert mode and Democrats everywhere scrambling because it's easily one of the most brutal polls that Biden has received in the past year, 2 years, bar none, both because of who made the poll and what that poll said. It deals with Iowa, which some people might not naturally think of as a swing state, but it has been in the past. And the pollster in this case, Ann Seltzer, is one of the best pollsters in the entire country, and she is universally respected everywhere. So we're going to dig into that because what she has to say about 2024 is very important, and you have to take what she says seriously. And what she has to say about Joe Biden's campaign is not good. What she has to say about Trump is very good. So depending on where you are, this is either the best poll ever or one of the worst. So that's the agenda for today. So we're going to jump right in here to the first one. So obviously, if you've been on social media at all, you might have seen the video of Joe Biden on this stage. It was a big fundraiser that Democrats held in California. Trump held some similar ones in California, if you may recall, a week or two ago, where he was hitting up different places with tech founders in San Francisco and some other places and raising a lot of money. He raised around $28 million across various fundraisers. So this dangled out a target for Democrats because obviously this is a blue stronghold of all blue strongholds. So they brought in all the big guns. You had Obama, you had Jimmy Kimmel, you had all the celebrities there, and they were all lining up to bring in all of these donations in order to hit back against the fact that Donald Trump had just been there a few weeks before, and now they're here trying to hit those same numbers. So ultimately they did. They were able to get the donations that they wanted. They raised around between 24 and 25, I think close to around the same numbers that Trump did. So in terms of money, it was a great event for Democrats. If you're measuring by the fallout from what happened once this viral video came out, it was a very negative event. So we're going to go and show part of this clip here. The man who filmed it is Chris Gardner. He works for The Hollywood Reporter. If you've ever read anything about what's happening in movies or anything like that, you've probably read something out of THR. It's a great publication for those sorts of things. But because this was out in California, he was there too. And so what he did was he filmed this end here. He's just doing some straight reporting here. You can see him talking about how there was the president there, Obama was there. They're all hand waving at the end. And all he's doing here is just recording what's happening and telling you what she's saying. And the key part here is the last part here. He talks about how Obama grabs Biden by the hand and leads him off stage following the Jimmy Kimmel conversation. So this is the clip. I mean, if you haven't seen it, keep the audio down because that's not important. The main thing here is that you have the two of them leaving here, and then they're doing their waving, and then Biden just stops. He's just standing there, not doing anything. If you're just and there's Obama grabbing his hand, you lead him off stage. And so it's that moment where he's just standing there and not really doing anything that everyone focused in on. Because you've got Obama there doing his thing, you've got Kimmel here in the background, the band's playing, and you've got Biden dead center, motionless, just staring out to the crowd. Obama reaches over, grabs him, starts to lead him off stage. And this is where the curtain drops. It's kind of the interesting thing here to watch them walk off and literally watch the curtain drop here as they're walking off stage, leaving everyone behind. So this thing hit the internet on Twitter already with this, just with his recording, and I know other people have stolen. I mean, this has got 1.5 million views, and it's just everyone's focusing in on this about 10 to 20-second period here where he just stops, not saying anything, not waving. You've got Kimmel over there to the side, and Obama has to be the one to grab him and walk off. So this is a highly, highly bad story and a bad video if you're the White House. The number one issue in all polls universally is that Joe Biden is too old to run for office. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican. Everyone has this same point that they raise when it comes to Biden. He is too old to run for office again. And the White House knows this. That's why they're hypersensitive to these things. And so they came out swinging once it started being reported. So there's a little bit of deja vu in how this is being reported too. So the New York Post obviously picked this up and ran what you would about expect for the New York Post. They are covering it as, you've got Biden freezing up on the stage, had to be led off by Obama. And the key thing here is they use the word appears. So they're focusing in on, it just appears that this happened. And they do all the reporting. You get the same video that I just showed you, talking about how it's an awkward moment, how he appeared to freeze up. And so you get just basic thing of the New York Post reporting, this is what happened. Here's the video. It appears this is what appears to happen. Obviously, draw your own conclusions. They referenced other videos. So Biden has had the moment at the G7 summit back in Europe where he appeared to be looking off to a crowd. You had his awkward moment where he head bumped with the Pope, and other foreign leaders looked awkward around that. And there were reports coming out of there where people were also saying that he looked bad. So you've had this now about 7 to 10 days here where there's just been just avalanche and stream of videos and stories about Biden either freezing up or looking bad around a big crowd. And this is just the latest of them. So the interesting thing about the Post saying this is that they were the ones taking the heat for it. This was one of many tweets that, Colin Rugg pointed out here what was being said at the White House press secretary's press briefing. But you saw multiple members of the White House all attacking this New York Post story and calling it what they're terming a cheap fake. He references it here. They are cheap fake videos. And I don't know what a cheap fake video is. I don't know anybody else who knows what a cheap fake video is, but this is the new term. And you're going to be seeing this rolled out everywhere across all political media, from Democrats to anyone left-leaning, that the video that you saw here, the video from Chris Gardner and other things that, of course, Republicans are talking about, these types of videos are cheap fakes. What that means ultimately, no one really knows. They're trying to imply that these are deep fakes. They can't call them deep fakes because we know who shot this video. We know it's a journalist. We know he was there at the event and all he did was shoot the end of it. What Democrats have done is pointed to the TV broadcast of this, which kind of pans out to the back, but you can still see the same thing. Biden stands there awkwardly and Obama has to take him off. So the idea that these are cheap fakes or fakes of any kind is really ludicrous, because if you have eyes, you can watch the video. This is the video that everyone is pointing to, that everyone is watching, that everyone is saying, this looks bad. And the best thing that the White House can say right now is that these are cheap fake videos, and just right-wingers pointing out the obvious. And so, it's awkward. In this video, you've got the same thing. You've got him standing over here awkwardly while in, and I've seen all kinds of excuses for what's happening. You see in every one of these videos, you see excuses that are rolled out. It's one of those things where you're seeing a drumbeat of these videos, and the description of what's happening changes with each one of these things. Biden's acting awkwardly, and everyone's having to offer excuses for what is happening. The reason that this is important is not just because looks bad for Biden. It's how is this going to impact polling? Because when Trump was convicted, naturally, we all went immediately and started watching polls. We wanted to see what is the major poll that's going to come out that's going to show us how Americans are handling these kinds of events. How are they going to, I mean, no one's seen a conviction like this in a major election in a very long time. So how are Americans processing this? What are they going to do come November? That's obviously a big story, and you need to poll it and figure out what's happening. This is an equally large story. This is on par with the conviction story in that we've seen a flood of these videos, and now we need to start looking to see how the polls are going to move. They may move some, they may move not at all. We don't know, but to brush this aside and say it doesn't matter is the false thing to do, because we know Americans already believe that Biden's age is a huge liability in this race. The question is, how is he going to handle it moving forward? And with more of these types of videos coming out, it's going to be much harder for him to make the case that he is all there. You can't make that case and then also have these kinds of videos coming out. And, you've got these coming ahead of the debates. It's really forcing everyone to zero in on that first debate on CNN, because Biden simply can't afford to have one of these types of moments at the debate. He just can't. This is not something that you can do there and expect to survive. If he freezes up on any one of those answers, he's sunk. That's just the fact of the case of it. He has to be lively all the way through it. During the State of the Union, the White House had him basically yell for the entirety of the State of the Union address. And he can do that for part of these debates. He can start out in the first part of these debates and yell his way through his opening statements and even yell his way through a closing statement. But it's going to be hard to maintain that through other parts of the debates. And he cannot pause and have these awkward moments, or else it's really going to look bad, because you have these other videos of him doing other things. And I'll even note, though, even though they had him up and he had a prompter for everything, the most awkward moment for Biden during the State of the Union address was when Marjorie Taylor Greene interrupted the speech and tried to get him to talk about Lake and Riley. Biden sputtered his way through that. I thought it was, in terms of just optics for both sides, I thought it was a pretty awful moment. But for Biden, he did not handle getting off script quite as well as the White House would have wanted him to do. So that's the type of thing that's going to happen a lot during a debate. You've got to be quick on your feet, and you have to be able to pivot from one subject to the next. And it's unclear right now whether or not he can do that. Now, the good thing for Biden is the bar is set very low. He has a very low bar here. All he has to do is hop across it, and maybe he does, and he's fine. He did in 2020. But these videos are something else. And, when I'm waking up in the morning and getting multiple texts about this single video the next day from people across the political spectrum, it's landed in a way in which some of these other things are not. So in terms of 2024, I think we need to watch the polling and see if this type of video impacts it in a way that we were looking for the conviction to, because this is a big story. This is a viral moment. And if pollsters were thinking about it, they should probably ask about it. So watch for this in the next few weeks. Watch for the polls. It wouldn't surprise me if you saw Biden's approval ratings or something else, or his standing with independents slip a little bit. And if it does, and there's no other intervening news source, I would point back to this video as being the reason why you're seeing these types of dips for the Biden and Democrats. He's already at historical low approval ratings. If he dips further than that, I would point back to this video. So the next story I want to get into here is immigration. And the main thing about this deals with a report coming out of the Wall Street Journal, who's saying that Biden's going to give legal status to immigrant spouses of U.S. citizens. The plan is to roll this out. I'm recording on Monday the 17th. And Biden's going to do this on the 18th, so tomorrow for me. And so it's going to be a new immigration order where he's going to provide a path to citizenship for hundreds of thousands of immigrants in the country who are here illegally but are married to U.S. citizens. If you remember back in 2012, Barack Obama had a similar program in 2012 called DACA. Uh, the Wall Street Journal references here the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. They launched that in 2012, and it's effectively an election year thing to where you're trying to both look hard on immigration by enforcing some of the laws in some case, but also give an olive branch to your left flank, which is wanting to be more peaceful with immigrants and give them a pathway to citizenship. So you have this is the olive branch, the carrot to the left flank, where he's trying to bring in more Hispanic voters and blunt the impact that Donald Trump is having on that set of the election pool. Because in the last few elections, we've seen Hispanic voters tilt more and more towards Republicans. And I forget the exact number, but between 2016 and 2020, there was a double-digit shift from Democrats to Republicans, and everyone is generally expecting that trend to continue heading into 2024. And the reason this is important when you're looking at this is because of where Hispanic voters are going to be heavily sitting, and that's in places like Nevada, it's places like Arizona, and it's in some of the swing areas of Texas. So when you get into the Southwest in particular, you have high populations of Hispanic voters, and where they are thinking and where they are voting, you're going to be able to push a larger section of that state. So election year is a big time to start pushing out different types of immigration proposals because both parties are trying to coax these voters in one direction or another. For Trump, he's mainly just pitching a general economic policy where he's just saying inflation is bad and Joe Biden is bad. And when you're looking at a lot of these polls, his immigration stances aren't really impacting things all that much. Democrats are playing on an older playbook where if you're offering things like DACA or this program here, where you're offering effectively this is amnesty because you're offering citizenship or pathway to citizenship for the illegal immigrant spouses of American citizens, which, as the Wall Street Journal notes, is a fairly popular thing among most Americans. You're still trying to bring a set of voters over to your side ahead of an election. That's why he's announcing it now. It's why he didn't do it in any of the previous years. This is a direct pitch to those voters saying, I'm on your side and I'm trying to bring them in. Now, naturally, with these things, because I do read a lot of conservative media, I know the next thing is, well, this is just the Biden campaign trying to bring in illegal immigrants and boost up votes among Democrats, which I wanted to highlight here. Who can vote in the November election? You got to be a U.S. citizen. The only place you're going to see true non-citizens voting are in local elections in places like out in California, so just really deep blue cities. Some of them do allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. Who can't vote? Non-citizens. And I know everybody's going to say, well, that may be the law, but they're just going to bring people in. Well, this is where another story comes in, and you have to know how these things link up. Because there was another story where Democrats were attacking it, saying that it was voter disenfranchisement. And it's that Laura Trump is building an army of 100,000 poll watchers and over 500 lawyers to deploy across America. Every election, you see this kind of story pop up. And it's the kind of story that sounds dramatic if you've never worked in an election. And if you've worked in an election, this is a non-story. I've worked in an election. I've been in a presidential election before, and this is a non-story for me. This happens every last single year, but the reason that you're seeing these types of buildups is because Republicans want to be able to say to their voters, we did everything to make sure this was a fair election process. And it's not just Republicans that are doing this. Democrats do the exact same thing. Their organizations look a little bit different, but they're doing the exact same thing here. So in 2012, I was in one of the war rooms for Mitt Romney in a swing state, and we were in a room with 150 attorneys and other staff were there, and there were in that swing state there were lawyers canvassing the entire state. There were poll watchers everywhere, and there was just a constant buzz where everyone was monitoring reports we were getting from local races, from local areas where poll watchers were, sending attorneys out to go check and see what was happening at the polls, because you always have at every polling location, particularly in these contentious states, you get people saying things back and forth about what is happening. I wasn't allowed to vote. I wasn't allowed to stay outside when, with paraphernalia, campaign paraphernalia. It happens all day long on election day, and everyone is trying to build up an army to make sure you can do this. And Republicans have their group. When I was there in 2012, directly across from our building that we were in was the Obama campaign, and they had an equally large group doing the exact same thing that we were doing. So Democrats are doing the same thing. They're going to have their poll watchers who are going out to all these states. They're going to have their lawyers who are going to go out to all these states, because you have to be able to know what's happening. You have to have boots on the ground in these places, particularly battleground states, because whenever you see a lawsuit starting, it's because something has happened on the ground, and one of these poll watchers, one of these lawyers saw something, got the evidence they needed to be able to file a quick motion in a court to prevent something or to get something to happen. And almost invariably, every election, there's issue with voting machines, and they have to extend hours, and they have to get a court order to do that. And that is because some lawyer was on the site or got on site and figured out what needed to happen. So this is a very typical thing. This is not you're going to see the media always reports this as, oh, these are just Republicans trying to disenfranchise voters and trying to scaremonger. This happens every election. Both sides do it. I'm sure even third parties do some of this too, because you just have to have people on the ground doing these sorts of things. So this type of thing is being built to help combat any situation where you do have an illegal immigrant trying to vote. You're going to have people on site demanding, if your state requires identification, you're going to have that challenged. That sort of thing happens all the time. So that's what's happening there. That's how this story connects in with the Biden immigration story. They're both linked. I know if you're not into politics or you're not working on a campaign, you might not know that, but they are. So that's how that's going to play out. We'll see how the actual order ends up going out here from the Wall Street Journal. What I fully expect is to see is a legal challenge to this, because we had legal challenges to DACA in 2012, and it took several years to work out. So it'll take a while to figure out how this gets challenged too in the court system, because it's just these types of executive orders always get challenged. Immigration law in general is a mess, and so I would ignore any shoot from the hip attorneys on TV who are saying they know which way or not this is going to go, because immigration is a very difficult difficult area of law to practice, because it is so thorny. But when you throw on these executive orders, which are occasionally pretty poorly worded, it can throw a wrench into absolutely everything. So expect a legal challenge there, and then look for how Republicans and Democrats are going to fight this at literal polling stations all around the country, but particularly in battleground states come November. That brings us to the next story, which is the Credit Karma survey. So this was reported in CNBC, and the top line of this, which you can see in the headline here, is absolutely awful. You got 80% of Americans saying that grocery costs have notably increased since the pandemic started. Now, if you've been in a grocery store, if you've done any shopping over the last few years, you would say, duh, I know all about that. I've had to buy groceries. I know all about that. The top line number being cited here by CNBC is bad. When you drill into this Credit Karma report, it gets even worse. It's some of the worst economic numbers I've seen in any survey. So the main thing here is you have customers and consumers still saying that they're feeling burdened by prices. 80%. So that's basically everyone. And if you're not in that, you're probably rich enough to be not even be impacted by inflation. And the key thing here, Credit Karma notes the same thing that Republicans have been noting, which is that prices in grocery stores have risen by 25%. So you're talking since the pandemic. So since 2020, you've got prices that have gone up 25%. And really, it's not even since 2020. It's really more 2021, because you have to get outside the pandemic. That's when inflation really started increasing. So it's really just been the last 3 years, and you've got this 25% hike here. And then you get to this paragraph here, which is just brutal if you're a Democrat, because you're the one that's been in power. And it says, some consumers have had to sacrifice necessities to afford food, according to Credit Karma. 28% have had to sacrifice other needs like rent or bills to pay for groceries. 27% are skipping meals to pay in order to, or, your groceries are so high, you're having to skip meals to do it. So you've got a combined 55% of the people surveyed in this Credit Karma thing, and there was over 2,000 people. They surveyed, here it is, 2,011 adults, May of this year. So over half of them report either having to skip rent or bills or skipping meals in order to deal with the costs they're dealing with. And that's either you're cutting down on your groceries or you're cutting down on the money that you can throw at rent or other bills. So that's how this is happening. You got this massive spike in grocery bills directly impacting over half the country, and they're already having to cut expenses one way or the other to some pretty key things like rent, because then you're risking getting kicked out if you're skimping out on that. Additionally, you've got almost 1 in 5 Americans who have either applied for or considered applying for food stamps, and another 15% have considered turning to food banks. And at the height of the pandemic, 2020, 2021, and even in 2022, when you're heading into the midterms, you could find a lot of stories about how food banks were hit extremely, extremely hard. And they were unable to keep up with all of the demand that they were getting. And so these are the sorts of things where it's going to impact the election. We just don't know how. James Carville likes to say, it's always the economy. Keep it simple. It's the economy, stupid. And that's what these types of stories are telling you, that Americans are being hit hard by inflation, and that is with all the improvements as we have, because the rate of inflation has gone down, but inflation is still going up, which is why you can get that 25% increase. And you've got these people looking here about food stamps. Half of them can't get it, and so everyone's noticing that the grocery prices are higher. You've got higher gas prices and just everything here. So housing, your bills, cable, dining out, everything is going up, and everyone's having to deal with it. And when you get there in November, everybody's going to have to answer the same thing. And there have been polls that have shown this. They're going to ask themselves this: was I better off when Trump was president, or am I better off when Biden was president? And if you're voting on these lines here, if you're looking at inflation and the cost of a grocery bill, the answer to this is pretty simple. And they're going to say, I was better off under Trump. We've seen this in polls where voters have said this. In the New York Times Siena College poll a few months ago, asked this very question: were you better off under Trump policies, or are you better off under Biden's policies? And Trump won a majority of that poll in a national poll asking this very question. So, and economics, the cost of living, all of these things are still driving voters crazy. And how they square that when they enter the voting booth is going to be one of the top issues. Because, you can be a single issue voter on things like abortion or the Second Amendment and some of these other issues, but an overriding factor for most people is their pocketbook. You know what your grocery bill looks like every day, and you're going to be reminded of that every time you go to the grocery store or every time you pay for gas. These are weekly things that people do, and they're not able to do it comfortably right now. You've got them skipping meals or having to skip out on rent, or they're not buying as much because they can't afford it. And this impacts everyone. If you're on Social Security, it's going to be hitting you even harder. So this is something that impacts every American. A lot of this is kind of baked into the polls because everybody they know, whatever you think about inflation is what you're probably going to think in November. But it's important to note this is not dying as an issue, because Americans are still saying, I cannot afford to do anything right now. Can't afford rent, can't afford groceries, and everything is hurting right now. So that will impact. I'm expecting it to be one of those issues that when you see the exit polls that are finally given to us after the November election, I would expect this to be a top issue, if not the number one issue, a top three. And I would expect it to dominate, a third of the electorate, as this is the thing that I was thinking about when I was going into the voting booth. And if that's what a third of your voters are going there thinking, this is not where you want to be if you are the incumbent president. It doesn't matter what party you're in. If this is where people are, that means they're going to be unhappy when they're heading into the voting booth. How they deal with that is another question, but this is just the reality. And you can look at this survey or you can look at any others, but this is one of the more brutal ones that I've seen. And it's not a political place. Credit Karma's not into politics. They're just asking people how they're handling their grocery bills. And the answer is, it's not great. Last poll I want to cover for the day is also not great, and it comes to us from Iowa, and it is just a brutal poll. And it is where Donald Trump is maintaining a big lead over Joe Biden and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. This is out of the Des Moines Register. So the key thing to note about this poll is it's run by a lady named Ann Seltzer, and her polling group, she is widely considered to be the gold standard in political polling in America. She mainly focuses on Iowa. She started branching out in the last few cycles into national polls. Her Iowa polls are the stuff of legend. Her final Iowa polls before primaries and before presidential elections are generally considered to be just head on nail perfect, and she's usually going to nail it within a point or two. Her accuracy is uncanny in these races, and so that's why when we're looking at this, it looks so bad. So the new poll that is out shows that Donald Trump is leading Joe Biden 50% to 32. So he has an 18-point lead. The reason that this is very important, because some of you may think, well, Iowa's a red state. And the answer is no, it's not that red. In 2020, I think Donald Trump won it by around 9 points. And this is a state where we've seen other Democrats like Obama either be close or win it outright. Right now, Iowa, where Ann Seltzer has Iowa, you're talking about a state that is as red as someplace like Mississippi or Louisiana. It's looking like a plain state or a southern state where you're approaching a 20-point victory for Donald Trump, which is wipeout territory for Joe Biden, where he's just not going to stand a chance here. This is your thing that wipes out down ballot Democrats. It would not, if this type of thing holds, it would not shock me if Republicans hold every House and Senate race up in Iowa after this, because this is not a survivable margin if you're a Democrat in Iowa. This is not where you want to see. This is not what you want. And maybe you can, if you're a Democrat, you convince these 9 percentage points in RFK to jump over to you, and that gets you up to 41, which is better. But if that doesn't happen, you are truly, truly sunk. The chart here that we have here just tells you the same story. You've got half of the vote going to Trump, and everything else is splintered up among the others. So this is the other reason that this is, and the other thing is this comes after the conviction. So this includes everything there. They polled it in Iowa in February, and it was a 15-point lead. So it's only growing. We've gone from 15 to 18. So this is a brutal poll. And the other thing that it signals is that there is what Iowa can tell you is what is possibly happening in other Midwest states. So you can look a little north and a little northeast, and you're talking about Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin. You're looking at similar demographics in those states. And if Iowa is this far gone for Joe Biden, it does not bode well when you're looking at a place like Wisconsin, which has some similar different demographics in some of its neighborhoods and counties. It's not looking good if you're in, Indiana. They're not going to stand a chance there. So the swing states in the Midwest are very much within the realm of Donald Trump taking. Minnesota is the tough one. That's because it has a much larger college-educated population up there, which tends to swing it towards Democrats pretty frequently and steadily. It's one of the few states that stayed out of Reagan's column in the 80s. So that state might not swing, but it's pretty easy to see how Wisconsin, Michigan could swing along with this. It's also pretty easy to look at this. And, we still don't have any polling out of Pennsylvania, but it's easy to look at how Iowa's going and extrapolate into Pennsylvania and see how it could swing in Trump's direction pretty decisively too. So this is a red alarm if you're in the White House. This is the worst possible poll that could come out because it signals that you're in deep trouble across the entirety of the Midwest, and they've got a lot of work to do. And you're seeing Biden go to places like Michigan and some of these other places, but there is very little evidence that he's making any headway there. And if he's not making any headway, he's not going to win in November. He has to take Michigan, Wisconsin to have any shot of doing this. He's got to win Pennsylvania. And if Iowa is out of reach with him and we're approaching, 20% territory here, there's just no shot for Biden. He's got to close the gap. If he closes the gap in Iowa, maybe that signals better he's improving in other states. But if he doesn't close this gap by election day, he's sunk. And this is the best news ever if you're Donald Trump, because you've basically taken Iowa off the map. If Iowa is an 18-point victory for you, and it's called the moment that the polling closes for that state, it's going to be an early election night for you. We're going to know probably by 9-10 o'clock Eastern what the results of the election are going to be. It's not going to be a midnight thing. It's going to be an early night because you've swept through a lot of these different states. So this is the gold standard. If any Democrats want to fight that, you can just point them to Ann Seltzer. She is the gold standard. You can go look at 538's rankings of pollsters. This is an A-plus pollster, and this is arguably the top A-plus pollster, and it is Biden's single worst poll that he's received in the election thus far. We'll see how things go as we move along, but this is not where you want to be if you are a Democrat at all. So that's going to bring us to the end of today's show. That's all I've got. Make sure to please give this video a like. Please subscribe to it. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. God bless, and God bless America.